to ASME's A Day in the Life webinar series brought to you by Engineers for Engineers. I'm Rani Haroon, and your host for today's first of a series of 3 webinars that ASME will bring to you this fall. So what's the purpose of this webinar, and what's A Day in the Life webinar series all about? Well, if you're not wondering right now, I'm sure you all wondered at some point what a day in the life of a mechanical engineer working at companies like Boeing, Aerojet, or Tesla would be like. Now you have the chance to find out through this interactive webinar series. Here's how the webinar will work. In a minute or so, I'll introduce our special guest speaker of today. But first, let me tell you how this webinar will work. Starting with some housekeeping, all webinar participants are signed in listen mode only. So please type in any questions you might have in the dialog box on the webinar platform anytime during the webinar. All questions will be answered after the introduction of our guest speaker. In fact, the Q&A session will be an integral part of this webinar. You may ask any kind of questions, whether it's related to the mechanical engineering field, the company, the industry, career-related questions, or any questions related to the speaker's job or position. So for those who are not familiar with how YouTube Live works, this is where you can type in your questions. Simply type them into the chat box in your YouTube control panel as shown here. We'll probably get a lot of questions, so we'll do our best to answer as many as we can during this webinar. So let's get started and introduce you to our guest speaker. Please meet Brian Murphy. He's a senior mechanical engineer at Boeing. Brian, if you can please introduce yourself and tell us your little story.
Sure. Thanks, Ronnie. Yes, I'm Brian Murphy, mechanical engineer with Boeing, as Ronnie mentioned. The airplane there might be a little misleading. I haven't done much for airplanes. My work is primarily related to space exploration, human space exploration. So a little more about me. So I grew up on a farm, taking things apart. I went to a really small school. There were only 19 in my graduating high school class, actually. Got my BS and MS at Texas A&M, which is quite a bit larger than that high school. Did some undergraduate summer research work there, which I really enjoyed. That led me to continue on to get a master's, to continue that research element. So I got an MS as well at A&M with a focus on control systems, mechanisms, and robotics. And then at the end of grad school, I got to go to South Korea for a couple of months as part of kind of a study abroad type program. So that interest is what eventually led me to Boeing. I was not initially, I've always been interested in NASA, but I was never looking for a job there or a job in aerospace at all, frankly. I thought I'd be a researcher for life. I really enjoyed grad school. But my wife also has a BS and MS in mechanical engineering, different focus, but she got a job offer to work the space shuttle, and I got a job offer to work space station, and those were hard to turn down. So that brought us to Houston, and we're still here.
Okay, thank you, Brian. So I think at this stage, we are ready to begin our Q&A. Let me just, yeah. So to get us started, how about I ask you the first question, Brian? So one thing that I think a lot of people would probably be wondering here on the audience is, what do you like the most about working at Boeing?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's the people. You know, I'm lucky I got to working in human spaceflight itself is a lot of fun. And then the team that I happen to be joining is just a lot of individuals that enjoy that as well, and are very sharing with their knowledge. They want other people to learn continuously. So I'd say that camaraderie we have, even across with our NASA customer, and other contractors that work for NASA, that community, that environment is great. Within Boeing, I've worked with people from many other sites, California, Washington, and NASA centers and KSC in Florida, and many other sites, Boeing employees. And it's just, I just, everywhere I go, it seems like people are, they're trying to get the task completed. They're wanting to help each other out and get the job done. So yeah, that's what I think I like best. The work has always been very interesting, challenging for sure, but very interesting. But the people, I think, is what makes it. So more on that. So I mentioned my wife is an engineer as well, and Boeing's routinely named #1 amongst female engineers. And as well, NASA, among government agencies, NASA is routinely ranked #1 among female engineers. So I love that. I love the diversity and inclusion that Boeing brings.
Cool. So you have a whole family of engineers. So we're already getting a lot of questions here. So let's start with the first one here that I see from Richard. Are there any emerging trends in the space industry that upcoming engineers need to be aware of?
Sure. Hey, Richard. Yeah, I think so. It's just like many industries, technology continues to develop. So I think there will always be a kind of a coding aspect. Engineering fundamentals will always be necessary, but it's more and more to become well-versed in code. Your specific tools can vary. MATLAB is still very prevalent, of course, but your core languages are useful as well. But all the buzzwords you hear are relevant. AI, machine learning, big data, all that is playing a part. But I think it's always been important, but probably more important than ever, to just maintain that lifelong learner mindset, that growth mentality, that you're always going to keep learning, and then you'll be fine, I think, if you do that.
Okay, great. A lot of questions. So like I said at the beginning, we'll try to keep up. So please, if I don't get to ask your question at the end, please, it's not personal. So we'll try again to do our best to get as many questions answered as possible. Questions from another question from Katie. What do you find most challenging about your job?
Hey, Katie. Most challenging, that may also be the people. I guess the work intrinsically is challenging. The technical challenges are there. I think for all the work, it's always a team effort. I've had incredible mentors, and that's been great, because there's always been someone whose door I can knock on, and that's locally and across the company. So there's technical challenges for sure, but for those, it feels like you're always working together. I mentioned that people are great at Boeing, and that's true. I think no matter where you go, there will always be a person or two that just kind of is difficult for you to work with, and you have to keep your patience and treat them with respect, even if they drive you a bit crazy.
Okay, great. Thank you. Another great question, this time from Harsh. After working for this many years with Boeing, what advice would you give to early career engineers for excelling at their career? What were the key points that you would like to share or mention to our audience here?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I actually spoke with a couple of recent hires because it's been a while for me to get their take on this. And it's a lot of what you would probably think. You want to, again, maintain that growth mindset. I do remember when I started working with Boeing, I had a little bit of that imposter syndrome, where I felt like I have this degree, but I don't really know what I'm doing. So come in knowing that you're going to get training. You'll probably get tasks that both achieve a necessary objective, something that the company needs, but then also will grow yourself in that skill set, both maybe the particular tool you're using, software or whatnot, but then, the fundamentals behind it, you'll learn that as well. So learn as you go. Don't feel like try not to feel like you're always rushed to complete tasks, particularly your first several years. I mean, they want to get work out of you. They want you to be productive for them, but they also want you to be learning along the way. And I think it's really important to form those habits early on. Also, so Boeing is fantastic with providing continuing learning opportunities. They'll pay for your grad school. They'll pay for in individual classes. I took one on additive manufacturing, 3D printing from MIT last year. Just like in the evening. It's not as much as a full class would be, not as long, but boy, I learned a lot. So take advantage of those kinds of things. Continue learning, particularly, some of you probably already have a family, maybe, married with kids and things like that. And some of you may choose not to go that route, but anytime you add family members, it adds complexity and takes away time. So early in your career, if you have the time, use it.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Another interesting question from Arian here. I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly. So he's from India. He's also a mechanical engineer. And he was wondering, I guess his options, or if it's possible for him to join Boeing without any experience right after graduation. So I guess he's not a mechanical engineer yet. He's a student still.
So you'd have to look through the details of that. Sometimes there's citizenship requirements or, green card for particular lines of work. Two of my mentors were both born in India, both fantastic engineers, critical to my maturing as an engineer, both very, very creative, insightful, and again, just very generous with their time to help me learn. They're both, about the difference between me and you guys, maybe, 10, 15 years ahead of me. And they've been great. So I guess look into it, look at the particular jobs online, go to the Boeing job site and see what's required. So that's going to vary from site to site.
Okay, great. Another interesting question from Adam. How can robotics contribute to space exploration and inhabiting other planets?
That's a fun one. I'll have to be careful not to talk too long on this. So robotics, that term can mean different things to different people. Sometimes they think, mobile robot that's driving around. Some people think of a robot arm. One recent project I worked on was a new docking system for NASA. So this was what will connect, say, the Boeing Starliner to space station, as well as many other vehicles. And, I consider that to be a robotic mechanism because it's operating on code that's, actuating linear motors that, position a Stewart platform. And when the bodies come together, it helps them connect together and attenuate load and all that. So robotics can be used everywhere. If you mean, non-human exploration, Mars and, the moon and elsewhere, I think that's fantastic. Also, a lot of that is from JPL in California, but there's tons and tons of robotics companies, as you probably well know, all over the US and the world. So I think there's limitless applications for robotics, and I'm happy to see that there seems to be more and more room for automation and coding coupled with the physical, with the mechanisms, which I can't get enough of. Thanks for the question.
That was a great one. Question from Badira Jha. Are there any innovative designs currently in theory or testing at Boeing or any other aerospace company? And again, feel free to share as much as you can. Obviously not getting into anything that's confidential.
I'm sorry, I missed the first part of the question.
So are there any innovative designs currently in theory or testing at Boeing or any other aerospace company?
Yes, tons, hopefully. I think you don't win the work if you're not innovative. So yeah, I see a lot of innovation, a lot leveraging a lot of technologies, some of which we've mentioned. So that's required. But say for space exploration, there's problems that have not yet been solved that will need to be solved before we go to Mars, with regard to radiation shielding, and different things. You know, we humans were intended or built to be on this earth, and when you leave, the rest of the universe is not hospitable. So you have to bring your spacesuit with you, and not only that, you have to, you know, have more protection if you're in space for a long time. Going to Mars is much, much different than going to the space station for 6 months. So those problems have to be solved. But in general, aerospace for sure, you know, you have autonomous flight, all kinds of innovations. Too much to discuss today.
Okay, not a problem. Okay, so another question from Noah. As a student looking for an internship in the aerospace industry, what is the best way to set yourself apart from other students?
So I think this is a good one. It goes back to those a couple of friends I have at work that have been hired in the last couple of years. And really you need to have on your resume and in interviews, tie it to your own experience. So I'd say areas where you can, you know, your GPA is good, right? That's very important. That kind of gets you through some hurdles. Back to robotics, maybe the algorithms that choose which resumes to float to the top. But aside from that, I think experience. For me, I learned so much from doing projects, hands-on projects, incorporating what I've learned. So if it's robotics, then, you know, you can write your own robotics code for, you know, even with Arduino or Raspberry Pi, that kind of thing, hobbyist stuff. You can also do volunteer work for schools, helping other students, those sorts of things. Demonstrating competency, demonstrating that you can be a team player, and that you can learn new skills. These are all things they're trying to find, usually by reading between the lines in your resume. So all the better if you can highlight it directly.
Okay, great. Thank you for the answer, Brad. So just for those that missed it on the chat there, a lot of people are wondering if we're going to save the recording of this webinar. The answer is yes. So what we'll do is the recording will be uploaded into the ASME website, and we'll share the details later on. So just sit tight, and we'll share everything after this webinar. Another question from Jeff. I think he's wondering about work-life balance at Boeing.
That's good. Yeah, in fact, I was about to ask that question myself when I said all that stuff you should be doing as a new hire. I think that's extremely important. You know, self-care is a buzzword these days, but it's real. You really need to keep that in mind. So work-life balance is very important. For me, I am now, you know, I'm married. I've got 2 kids in elementary school, and I always think about that. One thing I love about Boeing and many other companies is the flex time they have. So the way it works with Boeing at most sites is you have, you know, in 2 weeks, you need to work 80 hours, right? But within that 2 weeks, they tend to be very flexible about when you work them. So if my kids have some school event during the middle of the day, fortunately, I live and work close to the school, so I can go there and then come back. Or if I need to make up a couple hours in the evening one day, I can work from home for that couple of hours and do so. But however you do it, you gotta take care of yourself, both physically and then also mentally, right? I think it's dangerous to go to work, come home, you know, eat and Netflix until you go to bed. That's not good, right? Long term, that's not good. So I'm not saying I do all these things, but exercise, you know, take care of yourself, take care of others. I do have a big interest in the community outreach, STEM and STEAM with others. I'm the vice president of a nonprofit, Makerspace, a local one. And through that, I get to do outreach with students, you know, middle school, high school types, and even elementary. And that's very renewing for me. That reminds me that I love engineering because it is a job, right? It is a job, and there's the day-to-day part. So you got to find something that kind of puts energy back into you. Yeah, it's very important, but the trend is better. the trend is better work-life balance. In fact, a year or two ago, our CEO said something like, work is not the most important thing. Family is the most important thing. So I thought that was pretty powerful coming from our CEO.
Okay, so things are essentially getting better. Is that what you're saying? Even though it can be challenging at times, it is getting better?
Yeah, what I mean is that the trend in the industry is that it's improving, right? It's becoming more and more accommodating to work-life balance.
Okay, okay, makes sense. Thank you, Brian. Question from Hugo. What are your work tools in everyday life? For example, 3D CAD quality tools. I guess you're just wondering about the tools that you use the most.
Right.
Good job.
So the mainstream CAD tools are used. I'm not going to name specific softwares, but those other than MATLAB, because everybody uses MATLAB. I think this is probably information you could find, but I'm trying to be careful about what I share and don't share about those particular software packages. But the mainstream CAD programs are used. For me, my study is kind of specialized. I do multi-body dynamics coupled with control systems. So it's physics modeling of how things move, the kinematics, contact modeling, those things coupled with control laws. So those packages are useful. What you could do is you could look online for particular job postings, and those will show you that information. So I'm not on the design side in terms of CAD. So I don't use CAD daily. I utilize CAD for building my physics models, the contact models and so forth, but my role is not the CAD, building the CAD itself typically.
Okay, great question from Justin here. He's not in the industry, so he's wondering, so how realistic would it be to change careers into your field after 13 years of unrelated energy industry experience without going back to school? Could I learn the technical skills on the fly?
Certainly, yeah, certainly. We've had people leave to go to do app development and that kind of thing. We had one of my former coworkers came from Caterpillar, right, the heavy machinery company. It's basically, if you know the fundamentals or can learn them, you've demonstrated that you can learn, then certainly you could come. It makes sense to see what particular skills are valuable in the particular niche you're looking for. If you're trying to do stress analysis versus controls, robotics or thermal analysis, maybe build that skill set on your own if you can, or become, maybe review it, right? You had this in college probably, but forgot the stuff you didn't use. So yeah, it's certainly realistic. It'll take some work, but you can do it.
Not impossible.
No, not at all.
Question from Gianni here. What qualifications helped you get your job at Boeing? So is it your experience? So I guess she's looking for what were the most important skills that Boeing looked at when they decided to hire you.
It's a good question. So I think if you can show some work experience in a relevant field, that's useful. Ideally would be like an internship or co-op with any engineering company. Something more closely would be better. I actually didn't go that route, which I would say was a mistake. I would never recommend anyone do what I did. I mentioned I grew up on the farm, so most of the time in the summers I would go home and continue helping there, which I liked, but it was not great career-wise. I did do the summer undergraduate research project. So I think if you can do projects like that obviously you're doing teamwork in your senior design and maybe lots of other classes. But those things that show a longer term project, particularly one where you had some leadership and demonstrates skills in that arena, then that's great. Anything you can do that's a significant project that requires teamwork, heavy on communication, either a presentation report, a significant report, that kind of thing, and that shows you can work well with others. Those are all vital skills for success, probably in any industry, but certainly in engineering.
Okay, great. So we're going to try, I guess, with the technical questions here from Vadiraj. let's see, is nuclear power propulsion system viable for future exploration?
Yeah, probably. I mean, I know Boeing actually did some as a nuclear engine on, I think, Mars rovers. That's completely outside my discipline, and I don't even do any kind of team project with those. But you know, nuclear is one of those that comes in and out of popularity based on, you know, accidents and what you do with the waste and so forth, of course. So there's, unfortunately, there's a significant politics aspect or public perception aspect. So when space station was built, you know, if you look at it, it's like mostly solar arrays, right? In fact, there's more solar arrays going up soon. The rollout solar arrays are coming within the next few years. It's another project Boeing's working on, helping to facilitate. So nuclear, I don't know. I don't know what to tell you there. Could be great, especially if there's not humans involved. A lot of satellites and others could use them, but yeah, I don't know what the political winds will be.
Okay, great. Thank you, Brian. So another question that's very, I guess, pertinent given the current trend in tech. So related to AI, from question from Visac. Does AI play any role in space exploration program? Would you know?
So I would say that's a technology that's ramping up. AI has been around for a long time, right? I remember when I was in college, one of my buddies was, you know, his PhD was related to AI, and so it's not that it's a new technology really, but it's becoming more and more useful. In terms of specific applications for space exploration, yeah, I'm not a good source for that.
Okay.
Sorry.
No problem. So question here from Laiho. How academicians can contribute in ongoing research at Boeing and other similar companies?
How can what?
Academicians.
I'm not understanding you, sorry.
So, so essentially academicians, you know, the ones that are doing research at universities.
Oh,
and,
like academics, gotcha.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I think there's a lot of room for partnership there. It's going to be targeted, and you know, I know we do work with universities. We had a speaker here not long ago, actually from Texas A&M, my alma mater, and we've worked with Purdue and lots of universities. Right? It's going to be, you know, you're going to probably have to have a proposal or look for something that the company is putting out there, maybe specifically for universities. So that's going to be a little more targeted. I'm not sure how I wouldn't know how to tell you to reach out to the company and say, you know, I have this idea for this project and I'm a, you know, research student at this university. Probably need to go through a professor that's been down that road before. Yeah. Again, I'm not the one to provide advice on this one.
Okay. Another technical question. I don't know if you can answer this one, but we'll try if you can. That's totally okay if it's outside of your area of expertise. So, question from Vikrant: do you need to convert physics-based model into real-time compatible models for hardware in loop?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, that is something that's coming up. You know, there's a general trend to try to have more modeling, which is good for me because that's what I do, of physical things. And a lot of times you do want those to be real time for simulators, or as you're suggesting, hardware in the loop testing. So you could be testing a new controls algorithm, or I don't know, maybe you're modeling you know, some other detailed mechanism in software while interfacing with hardware that will use it, maybe an actuator or something. So the answer is yes, that is something that's done quite a bit. I got to do a little bit of that in my grad research, actually. It's pretty fun. Yeah, so that's something it's done now and does seem to be ramping up in the industry.
Okay, great. Thank you, Brian. Question from Badiraja: can helium and hydrogen be used as oxidizers, which is present in nascent stage in outer space, like jets on Earth? use oxygen for burning?
Yeah, I'm not sure the essence of that question. I mean, we do use those as fuel for rockets. Those can be, some of those can be found on, on the moon, say. We can use in situ resources there for that. If you're asking something beyond that, then I don't know the answer.
Okay, not a problem. Question from Geronimo. I want to go into the area of control systems. What would you recommend for gaining valuable experience as an undergraduate student in mechanical engineering?
Great question. So people learn differently. I would say look at a lot of the, start small, look at, closed loop control, feedback control. And again, the way I tend to learn a lot is to build something myself. So you probably heard of Arduino, maybe played with Arduino, but if you're starting from nothing, I would say start there, just because it's easy to get started and then you can grow it. So, build a balancing robot, and then builds one that's trying to, some pointing mechanism that's trying to follow some, maybe with image-based recognition or something like that. Motion control systems, there's a lot you can do. So if you can find a professor as an undergrad, if you can find someone doing some kind of summer undergraduate research, I say summer because that's what I did, but whenever, some kind of undergraduate research project, that's pretty common actually. So you could look for something like that, and that would give you hands-on experience plus the credit for doing the course. And, sometimes they even pay you for doing that. So try something like that.
Okay, great. Thank you, Brian. So great question here from Siva. What is your typical day at Boeing?
Right, that's the name of this, right? That's the name of this
Yeah.
webinar. We made you wait
We're
until
waiting for that
now.
one.
So, so your day is going to vary a lot depending on the team you're in. To me, I sit with my, coworkers that are kind of within my discipline. So we may be, if I'm working on a large scale project, and we're probably talking a lot about what's going on while we're doing, running simulations or building analytical models at our desks near each other. If it's a development program, meaning one that's currently built up, then you may have meetings online or in person, a few times a week. Sometimes I'm juggling 3 or 4 different projects at once, and they may be unrelated. Maybe 2 of those are space exploration related and 2 are not. So those will all have a different feel. Some of those I will only check in once a week with who my customer is. And otherwise, I'm just kind of working at my own desk, at my own pace, doing my own thing. Others, if it's, like I mentioned, a development project is going to have a lot of people, you're going to be providing status and things like that. Currently, I'm on rotation with our chief engineers. So for the space station, Boeing is the prime contractor. So we have the task of sustaining the space station to keep it running. And so the top engineers for that are the chief engineers. So I'm fortunate enough now to be on a 6-month rotation where I shadow them and get to hear the problems they're working on. And then if there's one small enough, they'll break it off and let me try to solve it. And then we also meet with the NASA equivalent, which is so those chief engineers. So we actually had that meeting this morning. So I was there with all of them and could hear the top issues they're working, questions they're having. And actually this past Friday, I got to be, so periodically I'll go to the engineering room in the mission control center, where they communicate with space station and send commanding and whatnot. So there's an area there where most of where the engineering support is. And so I got to be there with those same chief engineers during the historic spacewalk on Friday, the all-female spacewalk. So that was awesome to be there and see that. So you'll get some of those milestones too that you get to do. I've gotten to go see some space shuttle. I got to see space shuttles launch, got to see some other space hardware. So your travel will vary depending on your particular role. I don't like to leave my family too often or for too long. So I tend to travel, I don't know, 2 to 5 times a year, probably, for maybe, a few days at a time. Other typical day, I have to get away from my desk. There's a kind of a green area behind our building where there's, ponds and ducks and trees. And so I'll go for a walk with a coworker there. We have an innovation cell that I like to go to, if maybe just to get away from my own desk for a little while and go there and work or work on a different project there. So you have some control over, how often you are where you are. And I mentioned that there's the flex time, and if you need to work from home, you can too. So I do that quite a bit now with my kids in elementary school. Probably at least one day a week, I'm gone in the middle of the day to do something. Maybe not quite that often, but depending on your role though, if you are a project engineer, then you may need to be in the office a lot so you can keep checking in with those people that are supposed to be providing you inputs. You might be traveling more. And some of that's going to vary as well with the culture of your individual team, maybe more than the discipline, your individual team and the management and how workflow works there.
Okay, great. Thank you, Brian. A question here from Adam. Hopefully that will make sense to you. So I'm going to read it. Job descriptions sound like engineers have a specific niche. Are there jobs available that start from the napkin sketch to a beta prototype? What type of people and qualifications get those jobs?
Yeah, so you're saying, you want to maybe have a new idea, and you want to mature it into something potentially, right? Yeah, I'm not sure. There seem to maybe be two parts to that question. So there are avenues for, if you have a new idea out of the box, there's channels you can go to elevate that. I think any company is going to have this. I've had several invention disclosures, and most of those are team related, and got a special invention award within the company for one of those. And then sometimes you get that and then it doesn't go any further, right? They're like, this was great, we like it, but it's not going to be applied very often, particularly for space exploration. Some things are one-ups, right? And so they're like, it's not worth patent protecting or something like that. I do have one patent pending right now. But I think the question was more about, the other part was more about hiring for those positions. And I don't know, to get that role, I don't know that that's a position you get hired on for. That may be more something that maybe a startup company would be more appropriate. But pretty much, I think anytime you're going to need a job, I would think, before you're just like, okay, let's develop new things. Sounds like you want to be maybe where I thought I wanted to be, doing research a lot and developing things. Like I thought I wanted to do grad school forever. So there are research institutes that might be a good fit for that as well, because then you'd have opportunities, particular solicitations you're responding to with maybe your new ideas. But in terms of getting a job at Boeing or an aerospace company, specifically to be like, come up with new things all the time, it'd be probably hard to do that right out of school. There are, R&D branches within any company, but I'm not sure what advice to give you out of school beyond that.
Okay, great. Thank you. Questions from Miguel, and I think you may have touched on that already a little bit at the beginning, but I guess just to cover that again and maybe in greater detail. So Miguel is wondering, what certifications in mechanics do you recommend that students have to get to work in Boeing?
So you really don't need anything beyond an ABET accreditation, ABET accredited, degree. We hire bachelors and masters. There are a lot of master's students in human spaceflight, or master's degree individuals. But there's lots with bachelors as well. And then there's some PhDs. More education doesn't hurt, but I wouldn't necessarily say do it just to get the job. You can always get a continued education after you've already started work, right? Other certifications, if you mean software, if you're a software engineer or leaning that way, it wouldn't hurt to get, I guess, a software certificate. But yeah, I don't know how much that helps. Doesn't hurt.
Okay, great. Thank you. Question from Vadiraja. How do you approach modeling a problem?
It's a really good question. And that's like the essence of maturity in kind of my particular discipline. So you have to decide which aspects are necessary to capture the behavior of the system. And you may want to start first broadly for the major components. It's very helpful if you have test data to correlate against. If you have some detailed test data of an actuator or mechanism, and you can, put instrumentation on there, that's ideal. Very often in the industry, you'll have component level data. So you'll build component level correlated models, and then you will assemble those as a system, and they will only function, you will only represent those as a model and never as the whole system. You'll never have a physical build. So space station, for instance, it was never assembled on the ground. It was put together in space, and most of the parts coming together only came together for the first time in space. There were no checks on the ground, and these are coming from it's the International Space Station, so you have components coming from different agencies, different languages, all over. So that was early in my career. That's one thing I got to do was how does this whole system behave? How do these attachment mechanisms work? And then you can model tolerances and things to see if they're still going to work well and not. Other things like like the station itself, right? It's huge. It's about a football field sized, American football field. And so it's massive. And sometimes you're worried about structural modes interacting with other things on the station. Astronauts are always doing exercise, so running on the treadmill or different things like that impart load into the space station, or maybe a vehicle comes and docks and the whole thing kind of shakes, right? So it's important to know what those fundamental modes are and get a good characterization so that you can then do loads analysis for these different things and certify that various events are safe. So I've gotten to do that before and basically said, we can't do this. We cannot do this activity. It's not safe. Or this other one, yeah, it passes with our margins in place. So again, you got to characterize the system to the point necessary where you can make a good judgment on how it's going to behave.
Okay, great. Thank you, Brian. Question here from Kathy. What do you like to look for in a mentor?
That's fantastic. You guys are throwing me softball questions. So I've been very fortunate with my mentorship. Pretty much all of my mentors have become part of the technical fellowship within Boeing, which are like kind of the upper echelon of engineers. And so you want someone that is, technically adept and interested in the discipline you're after. I guess there's different ways. There's sort of career advice mentorship, and that's really very different than career advice, meaning, do you want to stay technical? Do you want to become a manager? Generally, how should you interact with people to succeed, right? Sort of generic career advice type mentorship. And then on the technical side, you want someone that's interested in the discipline you're interested in, or maybe one of them. You may not know yet what you want to do, and that's fine. But pick someone who's in working some area that you think you might be interested in, but then they need to also be a patient person. And it helps if they're not like egocentric, because they'll share work and they'll share credit. And those things, again, I've been very fortunate because all my mentors have had all those characteristics, and I'm admittedly spoiled. It's not good to have a mentor that is impatient or seems to always run at high stress, because they're going to feel like they don't have time for you, and they don't have. And some mentors forget what it was like to not know everything. I remember professors that would talk about some subject and act like it should be intuitive to, any toddler, right? But it's only because they've been doing it so long. So it also helps to have someone that's still kind of connected to what it was like when you either maybe were coming out of college or not too far in.
Okay, great. Question from Gargi. I'm a PhD student working in the field of rotor dynamics, particularly gear vibrations. What type of job positions are available in Boeing for people like us?
Yeah, rotor dynamics is a very interesting field. It's one I've never worked in, but I've always been interested in. So you have all the problems of, you want to know if something's going to fail before it fails. So you do acoustic or vibration tests, right, on are the bearings. There are specific software packages for modeling rotor dynamics. Anything that's got something that's spinning, obviously. So I would say there's, maybe look at commercial airplanes. You could look at the defense side, rotorcraft, for instance, or I don't know. I think there's a number of arenas. Probably what you're thinking is the place to look. There's also rotor dynamics are important for in other areas too, right? Small scale motors. So on space station, there's a lot of environmental control and life support systems, ECLS, and that's an area that needs to be matured, but again, before we go to Mars. So that equipment uses fans and motors and pumps, things that are spinning. And it would be great to know, it's always great to know when something's on its way to failure. So characterization is important with that too. So I would think there's many areas that would have some level of rotor dynamic application, but you may want to start with the big ones to improve your odds.
Okay, great. Thank you, Brian. Question from Gianni. What activities do you think university students must do before finishing their education, other than an internship, for example? So any activities, anything like that to improve their skills?
I think your skill set is fine coming out like that. Any employer that's hiring you straight out of college knows that you have some skills, and you have, mainly they're saying this is a competent person. This is someone that can work hard, can stay committed to something. And if you've been successful, then you also have some competence in teamwork and communication. But anything you can do to build upon those things, some of the non-technical aspects, teamwork, communication, conflict resolution. So something, working on projects outside of maybe outside of the norm. If those are offered, maybe they're within a course, or they're an extra thing you can do. Those are all helpful. It just shows that you can be a good coworker. So that's important. I mean, you can be a genius, but if you can't work with others, then no one's going to want to work with you, and then that's going to damage your career.
Okay. Great, thank you, Brian. So another question here from Vadiraja. Another interesting one. What are the objectives of human space program at Boeing? Where is it pursuing now when there is a strong opinion on cost and ROI? So again, feel free, if it's, anything confidential.
Yeah, that's fine. Well, there's a lot to say. So Boeing and its heritage companies have been doing human space flight since the Mercury days. I mean, all these things, right? Every human space flight program has used Boeing engineering, all of it. And so I mentioned current, space station, Boeing's the prime contractor. The prior major program was a space shuttle. So that was a joint venture, but Boeing was the prime subcontractor for that. So it's not new. Yeah, so it's fun. It helps us kind of create new technologies, and it's interesting work. So I think I don't know. I guess I don't know why. I mean, I suppose Boeing or other companies could decide not to do it. But it's fun and exciting, and I'm glad they are doing it.
Okay, thank you, Brian. So Geronimo is looking for some advice. So he has done some research with a professor, and they went to the ASME Dynamics Systems and Controls Conference to present their research. That went pretty well. However, he plans to go to the industry for a few years. I guess he's wondering if you would recommend to go to a startup company or a company like Boeing.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I've been here with Boeing for 15, almost 16 years. When I first started, I thought, wow, this is neat. I'll do this for a little while. But I always thought I would just like start my own company, because I've always had kind of an inventive spirit. And here I'm still here, right? Because I really enjoy it. It depends on what you want to do. And you don't have to, you're not tied in. I'm been here since straight out of college, and I've been here this amount of time. You don't have to do that, right? You can move around. I've got friends that have left Boeing or other jobs and have started startups or are working with startups, and they're having fun, or they left for a while and came back. So it depends on what you want to do. Big companies have a lot of tools, a lot of knowledge, a lot of opportunities to move around within the company, but they're maybe not as nimble as a startup would be. Startup, you're going to have probably more roles and less depth in each role. Depending on how small the startup is, you may have, custodial duty as well, or anything, right? You may have to do some business type stuff, and maybe you want to. So it kind of depends on, do you want to go, I guess it depends on what you want to do, how you want to spend your time. Basically, I think both are good options. Big company, startup, anything in between, all that is good. Work-life balance tends to be, it's going to vary a lot more with startups, but younger companies tend to work their people a little harder. So that's another data point for you.
Okay, thank you. Quick question from Mike here. What is the interview format of a mechanical engineering role at Boeing?
Good question. I'm going to consult my notes from when I met with my recent hire buddies. Let's see what we got here. So I remember some of it though. They mentioned that, here we go. And they talked to some of their friends too. So it's going to vary. But you'll have, one of them had a single interviewer, another one had two. When I came in, I think I interviewed with like 8 different teams. So it may be in person or it may be over the phone. In their case, it was over the phone to start. They both came on as interns and then later were offered jobs with Boeing. So that may be a little bit different. But what they're going to do, they're going to ask you questions, a little bit about your education. It probably won't be mostly technical questions. They may not ask a lot of technical depth. They're going to be tugging at kind of confirming what's on your resume, and anything you can do in your answers to tie it to your experience is powerful. So they're going to ask you, when was a time you had, a difficulty with someone you were working with on a project, and how did you handle it? Or when's the time you hit a technical wall and had to get past it? What did you do? Questions like asked for help, did research, these kinds of things. They're going to want to see that you are self-actuating, team player, and that you've got some experience in these realms. So put your experience on the resume, even if it's just senior design projects, or, if you're younger, other things. If you're looking for an internship and you're not yet a senior, other projects you've done, even teamwork on lab projects is fine to answer questions like that. So let's see what else we got. Yeah, teamwork. It definitely, this was a strong point. Definitely know what's on your resume. Apparently, I guess one of my friends had a different friend that interviewed with a different company. I'm not sure the first full story, but they were asking him questions about things on his resume, and he's like, "What was that?" It was like, maybe a couple years prior, and it was not fresh on his memory. So they have limited data about you. They have your GPA and your resume, and that may be it. So be sure you know what's on your resume and tie things to your experience.
Okay, great, thank you, Brian. We're gonna wrap up really soon, so we're just gonna I think have time maybe for a couple more questions there. Most interesting project you worked on as a mechanical engineer at Boeing?
Good question. So one that I'll go with this one. So I mentioned exercise briefly on space station. So, when you go to space, there's no gravity, you're not walking around. So your bones have this cycle where they degenerate and regenerate. And if you're not applying weight to them, they miss that regenerate. So you lose a lot of bone density, you lose a lot of muscle mass as well. So they need to have exercise equipment. And one of those pieces of equipment that's very important is the treadmill. So you get that stomping whenever your feet hit. And that's very important for your bones and just generally for strength and cardio. A treadmill is good. But what's not good is, shaking the space station. if you've ever been at metal bleachers and jumped on it, right, the whole thing shakes. So those of you that are in vibrations, if that's an interest of yours, you're familiar with this probably. So I got to help work on the vibration isolation system for that treadmill. So it was a commercial treadmill that they made some minor modifications to, but most of the work had to do with isolating the vibration. So, you know, it's like fancy shock absorber kind of things. It's a lot more to it than that, but it's really interesting. And I loved it because it was fairly early on in my career that I got to work at Stephen Colbert. It's when he had his other show, and he got his people to write in, vote his name as the name for that, actually for that pressurized element that was going up on station. So an astronaut came on, and I think they first said they were going to name the toilet after him, but then they said it was the treadmill. But I love it because technically it was very interesting. I got to work with some great mentors, but then pretty much every astronaut that's gone up there since then has run on that thing, right? Has used the thing that I helped put up there. So even though I've worked in this job for so long, there's still, I don't know, there's still a little bit of a celebrity feel from these astronauts. And it's really cool to me that I got to work on something, one little piece that helps keep them healthy, every single one. And so that was a really fun project.
That sounds like a lot of fun too. Thank you, Brad. Another great question here from Raj. In what areas do you feel like you could improve that's related to your position at Boeing?
Good question. Too bad we've only got a few minutes left. Yeah, there's a lot. I think just kind of generally getting more breadth. So within my discipline, I'm a subject matter expert for the company. There's always more to learn there, and there's more kind of adjacent aspects to learn too. But what's been really good for me about this chief engineer's rotation is I get to see a lot of the other systems that I don't normally work on, like thermal control and life support, some of the avionics, electrical, lots of different ones that I know a little bit about, but really no depth. So I think adding that breadth is important, because now it'll help me have context when I'm working a particular issue that then affects other systems. And then, you know, I can always learn more within my own discipline. So I'm not going to be done learning soon. And part of the reason I know that it's important to keep learning.
Okay, great. Thank you, Brian. So I think we're going to, we're approaching the top of the hour. So we're going to wrap up. But before we do so, I just want to give you, I guess, a chance to share any last thought, anything you want to kind of share with the audience here that is important that we haven't covered.
Sure. You know, it may be that you get a job and you work it a while and you realize you really don't like it. Maybe you don't like that particular team or the technical work or something like that. So don't get so comfortable that you don't want to try something else. Particularly earlier in your career, you know, I didn't move around, but I think it'd be good. It'd be good to do that. If you go with a big company, there's probably lots of different sites you could go to, or even within a certain site, there's probably many different areas you could work. Or if you change companies, right? I'm here at Johnson Space Center in Houston, and there's lots of different companies that do work for space station in different aspects. So realize that, you know, you may be an engineer your whole life. Hopefully you got into it because you like something about it. And so if you don't like what you start with, then keep trying other things. And then, you know, one last time on my soapbox to keep learning.
Thank you, Brian. This was really great. So let's wrap this up. I think, let me just share my presentation very, very quick. Okay, so thank you all very much for participating in today's webinar. This was the first of a series of 3 a day in the life webinars that ASME will bring you this fall. The next webinar will be on November 5th at 1 p.m. Eastern. And we'll have the honor to welcome a guest speaker who works at Aerojet, which is the America's top rocket and missile propulsion manufacturer. For details on date and registration information, please go to asme.org/a day in the life. Like I mentioned a few minutes ago, all webinars will be recorded and will be available online at www.asme.org. And lastly, very important, in a few minutes, we'll send you a short survey. So please be so kind and give us your feedback so we can bring you speakers and topics that are most interest to you in the future. Thank you again, and hope to see you on our next webinar in November. Thank you, everyone, and thank you again, Brian. This was wonderful. Bye.
Thanks. Yeah, I hope I was able to provide a little insight, and best of luck to all of you in your careers and in your life.
Thank you, Brian. Bye, everybody.